Hey, what's up YouTube? Today we are going to learn how to create a search bar inside of Next.js 14, and this is going to allow the end user to query through the database, and then we're going to filter our database based on that query search term, and then we're going to show it to the end user. So this is like any website that you see on the web that has a search bar. So the technologies and frameworks we're going to use for this specific video is going to be Next.js 14, TypeScript, MongoDB for the database, and Prism ORM to connect the database to our application. So before continuing this video, if you do not know or you're not comfortable with Prism or MongoDB or even TypeScript, I recommend learning those before continuing with this video, because in this video, we're just going to go over how to create the search functionality inside of Next.js 14. So now that we got that out of the way, if you look at my screen, I have a development server open on localhost 3000, and this is what we're going to create. So what we're going to do is we have a search bar up the top, and we're going to be able to search through these voices that I have down below. And the voices have each an image, a name, some text, and then audio for that text. So say we want to search for Clyde. We're going to type Clyde, and Clyde will pop up. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to look for Joanne. Joanne pops up, and the search bar is working as it should. One thing I want to show too is I want to pull up a diagram of explaining how it kind of works and how it renders. So as you can see here, we have a web page, and this web page is the gray part and it is representing our development server. And at the top, we have a search bar, and the search bar is a client component. So we have a client component inside of a server page, and then right below it, we have our pretty much database data down below in a listed way, and that is also a server component. So as you can see, this just gives you a better visual of what is a server component and what is a client component that we're using. So before we actually get coding, if you could hit that like button so other people just like you could see it, and also subscribe for more content like this, and hit the notification bell so you get updated whenever I come out with new content, because I will be going live and creating a SaaS live pretty much every day on YouTube. So make sure to hit that notification bell so you're updated to date on that. And let's get started with the code. Quickly, we are going to go over the Prism functions that allow us to query our database. So what you see on the screen is, if I zoom in a little bit more, just one more time, you're going to see a function called get audio files. This function is using a Prism method, which is find many, and it's going to find all of the audio files associated with a specific user. So that is what this function does, and all it does is return the audio files. And we are using that inside of our code, and I'm not going to explain any more of this because we're just going to go over the search functionality. So on our page localhost 3000/your-voices, as you see here, we have a page.tsx file, which allows this route to be publicly accessible to anybody on the web. And this page by default is a server component, because all pages in Next.js are server components, unless you mark the top as a use client directive, which this page isn't. So this is going to be our page that you saw in the introduction. And what we have, we imported two components, one from search voices and the other from the voice list. And as you can tell by the names, the search voices is where all the pretty much functionality is of how the search bar works, and the voice list is how we are displaying all of our voices, and then allows us to also filter the voices based on the query, which is why we're passing the query into the voice list. So if we go inside of search voices, you can see it is a client component because it has to be. We're using hooks from Next.js. We're using the useSearchParams, usePathName, useRouter. So the page has to be use client by default, and there's no getting around this. And it's kind of a stigma that client-side pages are bad. Client-side pages aren't bad. Websites need interactivity. They also need hooks. Obviously, whenever you could do a server component, you do it. But if you need to use a client component, go ahead and do it. But use it in an optimized way when we're importing it into the server page. And this page is technically still a server page. Just this component is the client component. And in the voice list, we actually are importing that get audio files function at the top here, And then all we're doing is mapping through the audio files and displaying it on our page. So this is the end code. And when you see the next scene, we're just going to create this code from scratch. I'll copy and paste a few things that I feel are not important, but other than that, let's get to actual coding now. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a publicly accessible route so that we can actually display it to our user. So to do that, Next.js 14 does a file folder convention, and inside of the app folder, the root layer is technically considered the home page. So there is a page.tsx on the home page. And what we could do here is we could create a folder, and whatever you name the folder, that is going to be the URL path after your domain name. So for us, we could just do voices test. And this is going to be the URL that people are seeing. So make sure you actually name it something you want. For our video sake purposes, we're just going to name it voices test. And to make this publicly accessible, we're going to have a file inside of it called page.tsx. Or if you're using JavaScript, it's going to be .jsx. Next, we're going to use a snippet. And this snippet is from ES7. This is the snippet right here. This allows us to quickly create functional components inside of React. So what we're going to do to create it is we're going to type RAFCE. This is a React arrow function component. And we can name this page voices page. You can name the page, the function, whatever you want. All that matters is the name of the folder. That is going to be the path name. We can remove the import of React from React at the top. And what we can do is we could have our parent div. We will have an H1 that says search voices here. And then right below it, if you remember in our example at the beginning, which is what we're recreating, we have two components. One is called search voices, which is where our search bar and all of our client functionality is. And below that, we're going to have a voice list, which is where we're querying our database, fetching all of the data, and displaying it to the end user. So we are pretty much good with this page for now. And just to reiterate what's going on, this is a server component because there's no use client directive at the top. Next, let's actually create the search voices component right here. You can either create it in a components folder like I have down here, or for this video's purpose and sake, to make it quick, we are just going to create it right here so everybody can see it on the screen. So we're going to create a new file. We'll call it search voices.tsx. What we can do here is we can run RAFCE again. We could leave the function name called search voices. What we can do now is we can actually import it at the top of our page, because that is where the component is going to be shown. So import search voices, and this is just coming from the same folder file, and that's the path right there. Let's also make sure we are rendering the component on our screen by using it here inside of our TSX code. So next, let's actually work inside of the search voices component. Like I said, this is going to be use client. We are going to be using 3 hooks from Next.js, and I'm just going to copy and paste them over real quick and explain what they are. And I might as well import this magnifying glass icon, and that is from hero icons /react/24/outline. You could use any icon library you want. You can use React icons, whatever you want, you can use. I recommend using magnifying glass because that is globally known as the search bar. So what we do here is we put our imports here. And the search params, all it does is it allows us to read the URL parameters inside of the URL. So that is what the useSearchParams does, and it does it on a client-side page. The usePathName gives us the path that we're currently on based on whatever parameters you put in. So since we're on the voices-test page, it is going to give us that as the value. So it's just giving us the path name of the current path. And the useRouter allows us to navigate to pages through client-side components. And one of the features the useRouter hook has is called refresh. So instead of routing to a page, it could just refresh the page without updating and rendering the page. And this will allow us to update the parameters by using the refresh instead of routing the pages without pretty much rendering the page again like state would. So if you use state, which we can't use in this situation, the page is always going to re-render on each key type. So we don't want that to happen. So we're not going to import the useState hook. That is a reason why we're not doing it. Like I said, we don't want the page to keep re-rendering on every key type. So now for the search voices component, let's pretty much initialize our 3 hooks. Let's go back and store them in variable. So we're going to store the useSearchParams and the searchparams, the path name and the path name, and we are using the replace for the useRouter. Next thing I want to do is I am going to copy the UI of how the search bar looks. So I'm going to copy everything here in the JSX. I am also going to have a repo of this whole code inside of GitHub. So all you got to do if you want to copy the search bar like I am, just go click the link in the description, go look at the search voices component, and you should be able to copy this verbatim like I am right here. And where I got this from actually is I got this from Next.js 14's actual website. And on their website, they actually have a Learn Next.js 14 course, and it's totally free. I really highly recommend going through it. It teaches you the basics, is set up pretty good. And like I said, the best thing, it's free, and it teaches you a lot of things. What we have here is we have a squiggly is because we have an on change on the input. We have an input here. We have the magnifying glass icon. We have a label. And then we just have a parent div. So inside of the input, we have a handle search function that we don't have created. So we could create that above the return. And GitHub Copilot is trying to make me finish the code, but I'm not going to do it yet. And let me explain what this handle search function does. So anytime somebody's typing in the input, the handle search function is going to get called. And we are passing in the e.target.value, which is whatever the user is actually typing in inside of the input bar. And then we're accepting the parameters inside of the function, and we're just naming it called search term. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to be consistent, and I'm going to name mine search term like I did with the other one. Next, we need to get the search term, and we need to actually get this inside of the search parameters. Like I said, we're not using state. We're using state inside of the URL. So we are going to say new URL search params, and then we're passing in the search params. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to do a check. So we're going to say if there is a search term, so that means if somebody actually typed it in the input, we're going to set the params to the query. The value is going to equal query, but it's going to equal the search term. I might have not said that the best way, but when you see it actually on the page, you understand what I'm talking about. So the query is going to equal the search term, which is whatever the user typed in. And then if there is no search term, that means if nobody actually typed anything in the input, we are just going to delete whatever the query is at the moment. And then the last hook we haven't used with the last 2 hooks is the replace and path name. So when this check runs, the last thing this function is going to do, it's going to replace the current URL without actually re-rendering the page, which is how this is going to work. So the path name is going to be whatever path we are currently on. That is going to be voices-test. And then we're going to append it to the URL with a question mark. And then we're going to change the params to a string. So the params will be query equals, and then whatever the search term is. So that is how the functionality of the search bar works inside Next.js 14. Make sure the page is use client. You're going to use these 3 hooks from Next Navigation. And then we could import the client component inside of this page, which is a server page. So now let's actually test this out. So let's go to our page. Let's refresh our page. Make sure you're on the correct page. I'm on voices-test. Here's the search bar. And obviously nothing's going to display on the UI down here. but what's going to see is the actual URL search params updating as we type. So if that is working, then that means we are done with that component and everything is good to go. So let's type in like Clyde. So as you can see, as I'm typing, the query is changing inside of the search param, allowing us to essentially pass state through the URL without actually re-rendering the page. So that is working. If we remove it and then we type in like Joanne, everything is working. Perfect. So our search component is working how it should. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually accept the parameters from these URL search parameters inside of this server page. So to do that, let's accept these search params. That is how we're going to do it inside a server component. Inside of a client component, you can use the useSearchParams and it will actually read the parameters based on the parameters that the page is displaying. But in a server component, you have to use the search params like I am now. So let's just give it the type that's supposed to get. I don't have the type here. Let me just do that real quick. So like I said, we are just accepting the search params, and then we are, since we're in TypeScript, we are just defining the type as a query, which is a string, and all of the search params can actually be optional. That's why we have the question mark added at the end, because it could be optional because somebody might not actually type inside of the input. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to give the value to the actual search params inside of a variable. So what I did was I named a query. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to say const query will equal the search params.query. And if there is no search params.query, then it's just going to be an empty string. Perfect. So now we are displaying the query based on the actual URL search params. So to do that, we could just actually console log the query. And what I could do here is just to make sure we're receiving it, query. And since this is a server page, we have to open up this server down here and see the actual console log inside of the server console and not the client. So I'm going to type in Clyde and see if we get Clyde. So we get Clyde in the URL. Now let's go back to our code. And as you can see here, it is displaying query C, query CL, query CLY, pretty much query Clyde. So we are actually accepting the value inside of our server page. So next thing we want to do is we can just get rid of this console log. And we are going to create another component called the voicelist.tsx. We could do React functional component again. We can leave the name as is for the function. And inside of this page, let's import at the top. Let's display it down here. And then what we have to do is we have to actually pass the query, this value, which was logged in our server, inside of the voice list. And the reason why is because we want to make sure when we query our database, we want to give the query of the user that's searching to the database so we could actually filter through the results and display the result that the user wants based on their search term. And right now we are getting a where it's squiggly is because we aren't accepting any props inside of the voice list component. So as you can see in our voice list component, we're accepting the query, and the query is just a string. So I'll do that real quick like that. And another thing we need to do is we need to make this asynchronous function because we are going to be calling the database inside of this component. So next thing we're going to do is we could go up here and we could take all these imports, and I'll explain them real quick. And the first import is a separator, and this is from ShadCN UI. It's a great UI library that allows you to create UI components quickly and easily that are already styled for you. You could also import an image from next/image to display the image. We can remove the import from React. And this import get audio files is the function that allows us to get all of the audio files based on the user from our database of MongoDB. And as you can see, each audio file has parameters of an ID, user ID, file name, count, AI name, URL, text, image, created at, and updated at. And these are all defined inside of a schema.prism file. So like I said, if you don't know Prism, if you don't know MongoDB, some of this might be confusing to you, and this part could be confusing. But since we have that audio files, we are going to call it by putting in a variable called audio files, and we're going to await the get audio files function. And what we can do down here is we can console log, make sure we are getting the audio files. And what we can do is we can refresh this page. We refresh the page. And I have a bunch of console logs going on at one point. But if you do console log it, you're going to get a bunch of audio files based on the user logged in. And here they are right here. So you see all these audio files. They have the ID, user ID, file name, count, AI name. So all of that stuff here, that was here, you can see we're getting here. And we have a count. So we have a bunch of audio files inside of our console log. So we are retrieving our audio files successfully. So if you do want to check any of your code, you could always console log a bunch of things, a bunch of variables to make sure you're actually getting them inside of a certain component. Next thing I want to do is I just want to copy and paste everything below the return for now, and then explain what's going on. No point in me typing this out manually because it doesn't serve any purpose for this video. So what we are doing here is if you're using TypeScript, you have to sometimes do checks. And I am just doing a check here, making sure that the array is an array and we're passing in the audio files because it could be false or an array. So that's why I'm doing array.isArray, because if I don't do that, it is going to say that this audio files might be false, and then there's no way they could display because it might be false and it could be a type error. So we're saying if the audio files array and the audio files, if there's an audio files array and the audio files .length equals 0, we are just going to display a p tag called no audio files found. Other than that, let me just close the terminal real quick. We are going to have a div, and inside of this div, we're checking to see if the audio files is an array, and we are going to map through the filtered audio files. So I made sure not to copy that over because this is very important and is a key part of the search functionality. And this is basic JavaScript. This is the filter method inside of JavaScript. So if we go back to the voice list of our example, I'm going to copy this over, this function, and we're just going to do it right above the return. So what I have here is we are obviously filtering the audio files, and I named it inside of a variable called filtered audio files. And what we're doing is we're checking if the audio files is an array, and if it's an array, I want to use the filter method, and I want to filter all of the audio and return based on the audio.ai name, and I want to make sure this is lowercase so nothing messes up when we actually search. So that's always a good check. Always make sure it's too lowercase. And it's going to include the query variable or value as well. So the AI name has to include the query variable. So the query is going to be whatever the user searched, right? Because we passed that from the client component to our page and now to our voice list server component because we're accepting it here as a param. And like I said, if you want, you can console log the query here. Make sure you're receiving it in the voice list component. And if you are, what we're doing here is we're getting the AI name. So the AI name might be Joanne. And we're going to lowercase it. And then we're also going to make sure that any letters in Joanne are included inside of the query. So if they type in a J, Joanne has a J, so Joanne's going to be in the filtered audio files. If it has an O, Joanne's still going to be there, and so on and so forth. So that's why we are mapping through the filtered audio files instead of just the audio files that we have here in this variable. So that is a very, very key point when doing the filtered audio files. And even though we are mapping through the filtered audio files at first, if there is no query to lowercase here, which that means if nobody's searching, it's just going to display all of the voices on the page at first, just like it should. And what we're doing here is, like I said, mapping through all the audio. We have a key as the audio.id, which is obviously a unique ID for each audio file. We are displaying the image in H2, which is the audio.ai name, the audio.text, and we're displaying the actual audio. And then what we have down here is a separator, which just separates, it's like a line that separates each audio file inside of the table. So then after you have this voice list done, this component, make sure you go back to this page. Make sure the voice list component is imported and rendering on the page. And now we could test everything out to see if everything is working. So let's refresh. And as you can see here, we have all of our audio files displaying. And we can do a search. So let's do a search for Clyde. As you can see, it's popping up. And if I just put C, anything with the C, any AI name, which is like Clyde, Charlie, or Rachel, it'll pop up. Since C's here, it doesn't have to be at the beginning, it's still popping up. And then if you want to do H, Charlie and Rachel pop up. A, now it's Charlie. So perfect. So everything is working how it should. And the last thing I want to do to make this app more optimized is inside of the handle search, we are going to actually add a React hook so it doesn't keep querying through your database after every keystroke. The hook we are going to use is called useDebounce. And as you can see, it has 1.1 million weekly downloads. And what this does, when it pretty much optimizes your app in a very efficient way. So for example, the handle search function, every time you do a keystroke, so if you type C, L, Y, D, every time you type in a letter, it actually runs the function no matter what. So it would run the function 5 times if you type in Clyde, because that's 5 letters. We don't want that to happen because we don't want it to keep searching and running that search parameter and keep querying the database after every keystroke. That is going to be very expensive if you have a lot of people using your database and doing searches on a daily basis, and that would pretty much make you broke. So one of the things you could do is you could use the useDebounce hook, and what this does is it allows a delay of when the function should be called. So if the function doesn't get fired again for say 3 seconds, then the function will actually call itself and run the function through. So for a better example, let's go back to our code. And I added inside the handle search function, and we import it here at the top. So you must install the package use-debounce inside of your terminal, and then import it here at the top like this, useDebounce callback. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do handle search equals the useDebounce callback. And then we are just going to have the value of string, and it's going to be an arrow function, just like this. And then it almost looks like the use effect syntax, where we're going to have a comma at the end. And then we are going to type in a value here, which is going to be the delay we're going to have in milliseconds. So we have 300 millisecond wait before this function actually fires to see if it is getting called again. So when you type C, the function fires. It's going to wait a little bit, and if nothing else fires for the function, it's just going to run the function. But if you type in CL, that means the function fired twice, and it's going to wait and see if the user is pretty much done typing or not. So that is why this is very useful, because you don't want to keep querying your database when not necessary. So the useDebounce callback is used for functions like a handle search function. And like I said, just install the package npm install useDebounce, and you could read through the documentation like here. And like it says, it's a delay in milliseconds. This one has 1,000, which is 1 second. You could do 3,000, which is 3 seconds. You don't want to do it too long, because if you do it too long, then you're pretty much, when the user types, the search results aren't going to display for say 3 seconds if you put 3000. So you could do 1 second delay, see what works best for you, what works best for your audience, and implement it into your code and make your code more efficient and valuable. Other than that, if you do have any questions about how to implement a search bar inside Next.js 14, leave them down in the comments, or actually join my Discord group where we have other developers who are like-minded like you, who pretty much talk to each other, could ask each other questions. It's a community that you could join that I highly recommend joining. And like I said, I'm going to be going live. If you're watching the video when this came out, I'm going to be going live creating a new SaaS on YouTube Live, so you can follow my journey through there. And we could bounce ideas off each other, or you can actually ask me questions while I'm live. But other than that, I hope this video has helped you a lot. Like this video so others like you can see it, and subscribe and hit that notification bell for more content like this. Other than that, peace.